All right, you ask and you shall receive. Somebody asked for uh, Aeneid essays, and somebody asked for specifically Pietas and Furor. I think that there is a good chance that these will come up as a 20 marker um, if you evaluating the importance of either Pietas and Furor, or either them separately or together. Comes up in your specification. Obviously, the moral values implicit in the Aeneid, including Pietas. We got the definition of Pietas there: duty to gods, the state, and family. Remember, Pietas always has three elements to it, and its contrast with furor. And we've talked about furor before in terms of there being righteous furor and not righteous furor. Bad furor. What's the opposite of righteous? Righteousness. Irrighteousness. I'll come back to it. Bad furor or good furor. There are two different types. I'm going to very, very, very briefly take you through all the examples, kind of off the top of my head, that I can think of in terms of Pietas. I would suggest that you go away and you do your own research and you add your own ideas. This is just the very, very basic level introduction to these concepts. I think that it is likely that these will come up as your 20 marker. I think that your 30 marker for the Aeneid is, I would put maybe £12.50 on it being women in the Aeneid. I'm going to try very hard in the next sort of day or two to crank out a women video for you. Obviously, there's lots and lots of research, and there is a PowerPoint in the area that I shared in the Mossborn lot that goes through every scholar that you will ever need for a woman essay. I suggest that you go away and learn them. So, Pietas and Furor. Thinking about them just in terms of Aeneas, because this is probably the lens through which you will approach it. I'm going to take you through book by book where we see examples of Aeneas and his relationship with Pietas and Furor. So, first things first, when we get first introduced to Aeneas, in the proem, he is described as famed for his piety. So, Virgil sets him up in the first few lines of the poem as pious Aeneas, as he's somebody who's famous. All of his kleos has come from his piety. It is his defining feature. Pious Aeneas is the epithet that is used most frequently for him in the Aeneid. So this is really setting up from the very beginning. He is a pious guy. We also see after the storm, he looks after his men. He not only prays to the gods and gives them thanks for the safety, he offers thanks to Ceres. He also goes and finds the stags for them. He goes and looks for his abandoned men, and he shows his face of hope to his men, even though he himself is filled with concerns and very, very worried and thinks he's lost all of these men. He shows his men the face of hope and says, look, we've been through worse, let's keep going. So that shows his dedication to his people and his dedication to his mission, even though really at that point, he's not really believing in himself in this mission. Furthermore, when we finally get introduced to Dido in book one, Dido has heard of him and has heard of him because of his piety as well. So this is now, this is something that he is famed for around the world after the Trojan War. We then go into book two, which is obviously the flashback to the Trojan War, and this is where I've put you in red here because I think that if you ever get an Aeneas essay on his character, don't start in book one. Start with book two, because book two, chronologically, because it's a flashback, is our earliest version of Aeneas. So book two is where we need to be looking at Aeneas from. So here we see Aeneas, he is not his best. This is his sort of lowest moment of Pietas, where he gives into furor the most. Remember, this is where we see him as this Homeric hero, this sort of Achilles-esque hero, who only is seeking glory, success in war, and murder. And so he ignores the warnings from the gods. He risks his family as well. He's willing to sort of get rid of his family to some extent. He's willing to go into war and risk their safety. He gives into what he calls the madness and the lusts of war. Obviously, what he refuses to do, which is good Pietas, is that he, number one, refuses to leave Troy without his dad, although he does then, try and go back into war. And number two, we get this beautiful image of him and his Pietas and his duty, where he leaves Troy. He's got his father and the gods on his back, burdening him with their weight in the past, and he's leading his son. We've got that beautiful male line. Pietas and furor ties into this idea of male and female as well. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the next video that I make on women. But we've got this idea of Pietas is a male thing. It's a male dedicated sort of trait. Furor is the domain of women. So book 2, we've got a potentially debatable book where we see some of his Pietas being sacrificed in exchange for his furor as he sort of pursues war instead. Obviously, book 3, book 5, we don't really read. Book 4, we see him looking after the wrong people. So he is still looking after people. He's helping to build Carthage, but remember, he's wearing that purple, that Carthaginian purple. He's building the wrong city. He's looking after the wrong people. Nellis, our scholar on Dido that we would always bring in, Nellis says that this would have been repulsive to a Roman audience. And actually, when he says, okay, guys, let's pack up and leave, remember his people rejoice and they're really quick and eager to follow through with that order, which indicates to us that they did not want to be there. They did not want to stay there. He describes Dido's land and Carthage as a land that he has found so sweet. Leaving Carthage is not an easy decision for him. He does it immediately. Well, he does it sort of immediately, because remember, he goes and has a nap on the ship, and Mercury has to come down a second time to remind him to leave. But it's difficult for him, and he has to shove his emotions down. We get that when he speaks to Dido, he wishes that he had stayed longer and could offer her words of comfort, but he pushes it down and he stays stoic on the outside. He does attempt to treat Dido kindly. Remember, you're never going to write in an essay that he was going to leave Dido without ever telling her. He was trying to find the sweetest words and the best approach. All of these show this sense of self-sacrifice and duty to others. So leaving Dido was not something that he wanted to do. Contextually, you would bring in some historical context here. He did leave the foreign queen, unlike Mark Antony, who never left the foreign queen, and he left her after only a year. Odysseus stayed for many years with all of his various affairs. So Aeneas is more dedicated than both Mark Antony historically and mythologically Odysseus. In book 6, we obviously go down to the underworld. He follows all of the correct rites. He listens to the Sibyl. He performs the correct burial rites, etc. He finds the golden branch, even though you could argue that, he has to rip it off. This is the ultimate Pietas because he follows his dad all the way to the underworld. So this is true dedication to your father. And remember, book 6 is a pivotal book because he then becomes inspired by this Roman race. This then gives him this sense of duty that he is inspired by. As he gets this manifesto from the Romans, he gets told this is what the Romans are going to do. Remember, he wars down the proud and pardons the defeated. And he leaves the underworld reinvigorated and ready for this war that's going to start in book 7. Bob Cowan, one of your key scholars when it comes to character and a character essay, he calls Aeneas a work in progress. We question how good a ruler he truly is. I would always have that work in progress quote in your back pocket because I think it's a really useful one in a lot of themes and a lot of essays. We see that Aeneas is not always perfect. He is not always 100% dedicated to his Pietas. He does not always have 100% of his furor under control. What Virgil gives us is a human character that we see developing and understanding and coming to terms with his own personal mission that he has to complete for the good of the Roman race, even though that will then cause him quite a lot of pain and personal sacrifice. We get Edwards. He says that she calls him a reluctant hero who does not pursue his own glory but acts for the good of the state. Again, book 2 and book 4 are really, really key for that. And then finally we get Philip Hardy. He says rather being driven by desire or ambition, he is forced into a mission beyond his control. And we see that in the first half of the poem, where his dedication is faltering. And sometimes he seems dedicated, sometimes he seems not. Remember, he thinks about things a lot in book 5 when the women burn all of the ships. He thinks about whether to leave them behind, whether to not leave them behind, whether to give up on the whole mission, whether to not give up on the whole mission. We see him in book 3, these books that you don't read, but it helps to have the context for. Book 3, he's constantly, every new land that he lands on, he starts digging for a new city, and he tries to found his new city, and he's lost, he's directionless. The first half we see Aeneas struggling with his Pietas. He doesn't necessarily have it under control 100%. Remember, Catherine Edwards, Philip Hardy, these quotes are taken from the In Our Time podcast, which you should be listening to if you haven't already. So moving on to the second half of the book, poem. In book 7, again, he lands on a new land. We see him looking after his people. We see him giving thanks to the gods. He starts building his camp, as he is then calling it. And he follows very generous customs in bringing Latinus gifts. He doesn't go himself, but he does send a lot of gifts and asks for just a little strip of land in order to settle. So again, he's polite, he respects Xenia laws, and he looks after his people. He makes sure that they're safe. In book 8, remember, he has a dream. The river Tiber says, go and find the Arcadians, don't give up, go and find a white pig with 30 piglets. He listens to the god Tiber, and he has the god's favour, which is a sign that he has exhibited Pietas, and the gods are sort of responding to that and favouring him as a result of that. Again, he honours his new allies, he listens to his new allies, he takes messages from them in terms of always living humbly, always respecting the gods. Remember, they are performing their own rites as well, so he has allies that are also religious and also dedicate themselves to the gods. And again, he's given new armour, which shows that he is favoured by the gods. And again, remember, he has almost traded that weight that he had of Latinus and his past, and instead now he carries and is burdened by the weight of his future. On that armour, he's got the future of Rome. So now his burden and his protection, remember, think about all of this symbolically, the armour is his burden, it's heavy, but it is also protecting him. What is on there? It's his future people. So the future will now drive him forward and protect him in his new adventure. Whereas all of the first half, he was burdened by the weight of his father. In book 6, he got to have closure with that and sort of shed that weight and look towards the future instead. Book 10 is another one. Remember, I've skipped over book 9 because Aeneas is not in book 9. In book 10, we get that he is filled with this sense of righteous furor when he hears of Pallas's death. And again, it plays into the idea of Xenia. What crosses his mind is that he sees Evander's table and he sees the right hand that he offered Evander. And it's that sense of duty, which one could argue is righteous and justified, because he said that he would protect Pallas and now he has failed, and so he is seeking vengeance. However, he is described as cutting a swathe through the people. So he's literally like a farmer chopping down crops, but those crops are people. So he's brutal in his murder of people. And yet, when it comes to Mezentius and Lausus, he picks a fight with Mezentius because Mezentius is one of the biggest enemies under Turnus. When he doesn't manage to kill Mezentius, he tries so hard not to kill Lausus and says, why are you in a rush to die? And then when he does have to kill Lausus, he carries him, doesn't let his body get sullied by the earth, and he carries him back on his shield and returns him to his men. So he's pious even towards his enemies. And then again with Mezentius, he tries so hard not to kill him and eventually does so. Mezentius asks for him to be buried with his son. We don't understand, we don't get an answer from Aeneas whether that happens or not, but we are led to believe that probably he will, because Aeneas is so dedicated to the sort of proper treatment of the dead. So even in his most ferocious, murderous frenzy, he's still managing to treat his people right, his enemies right, which is why I put this in orange, because I think that you could argue it either way. And I would encourage you to go back and read book 10 because I think it's a really crucial book. Book 11 opens with him taking Mezentius' armour and creating a thank offering to Mars. So he is dedicating his Geras to the gods. Remember, this is a key thing that defines Romans from Greeks. Romans take their Geras and they dedicate it to the gods. And this is where Turnus has tripped up and will eventually be his sort of fateful mistake. In book 11, Evander evokes their friendship, that guest friendship, and insists on Aeneas' vengeance for Pallas. We see Aeneas, he performs dutiful funeral rites for Pallas, and in fact, when Drances comes to him, Drances says, well, shall I praise your justice, your piety, or your feats in arms first? So again, even his enemies are worshipping his piety. And Aeneas is dutiful and graceful. He grants his enemies I think it's 12 days truce, so that they can bury their dead. So he is a true, fair, and equal leader there, again showing his pietas. We do get a glimpse of his furor towards Turnus, where he says, essentially, get Turnus to come here and fight me himself, so that we can settle this 1v1. But overall, towards most people, he is fair, kind, pious. Finally, book 12. For ages in book 12, he refuses to kill anyone except Turnus. When the terms of their truce break down and both sides start fighting each other, Aeneas, remember, he refuses to kill anyone until he ends up getting sort of battered. I think it's that his helmet gets the plumes shaved off it, that he says, right, I'm going to kill everyone now. And then he goes on his rampage. But for ages, he is trying to honour that oath that he swore before the truce, that him and Turnus would be the only ones that would fight each other. And so again, he's trying to stay true to his word as best as he can. Even in Juno in book 12, this goddess that has been a bugbear for him throughout, she gives in to his piety and allows for him to be able to settle in Italy. And then we've got this big orange bit at the bottom. He arguably righteously avenges Pallas. So he kills Turnus, even though Turnus is there, he's begging for mercy, he's unarmed. He kills him, so he does not pardon the defeated. That message that he got in book 6 from his father, that this is what the Romans will do, pardon the defeated. You can argue this final part either way in terms of whether it is pietas or furor, and I would encourage you to read the David West introduction to book 12. That very last sentence argues that he was right to do it, because in doing so, he, like Augustus avenging the death of Julius Caesar and killing all of the people that conspired against Julius Caesar, Aeneas is avenging his sort of pseudo son at that point. And so he has to do it. We could also read into it as this idea of, remember, Rome has come out of many years of having triumvirates and having lots of people ruling all at the same time. Is it Virgil praising Augustus as one singular person that rules Rome? I.e., we can't have lots of people ruling Rome. It has to be one person. It has to be Aeneas. It cannot be Aeneas and Turnus together. Again, we've got a bit of Bob Cowan here, that Aeneas develops in values and ideals from an Achilles, remember in book 2, to a hero based on duty and self-sacrifice. So it's that idea that he's lost a lot. He has paid a heavy price for all of his dedication to his mission. Now, very quickly, I'll go through some other examples of pietas and furor. So we get the Trojan men in book 2. We can argue that lots of them, again, giving into the madness of war. We get one of them, I can't remember his name, Deiphobus, can't remember what he was called. I think I'm making it up. But he sees Cassandra being dragged off and he gets consumed with furor. And so he ends up having to, dying, essentially, because he gives in to this passion for war. All of book 2 is all about men sort of being debased and losing their humanity and losing their rationality, because war equals furor, essentially. We see it with Turnus again. Turnus, he is a pious guy. He is dedicated to the gods. He is favoured by Juno. He comes from a good line. Turnus is a good guy. And yet, he gives into his furor. He gives into his passion. One could argue that it is righteous furor because he is defending his homeland. Turnus is an understandable villain, essentially. Fortunately for you, Turnus is not going to come up, probably because he came up last year for the 20 marker. But we get a series of, in the second half of the poem, young men that really give in to their furor. So we get Nissus and Euryalus, we get Pandarus and Bitias, who open the gates and let Turnus in. These men give in to this desire for war again, and it's there to sort of pick up on those motifs that start off in book 2, that men that just desire glory and war and don't think about the larger picture of what's good for the army end up dying. And so they are rash, and they are, on the whole, too young to know better. And the idea is that Aeneas knows better. We see this slightly with Pallas. He manages to kill lots of people. We know that Pallas is pious because when we meet him in book 8, he's dedicating to the gods. He's giving off these funeral rites. He defends his people. He's the first to come and rush to Aeneas and try and defend his people because he thinks Aeneas is invading. We know Pallas is pious, but we see him in war become consumed with furor and consumed with this bloodlust and hubris. As he manages to kill more and more and more and more people. He doesn't know when to back away. All of those, so Nissus, Euryalus, Pandarus, Bitias, Pallas, all contrast with Ascanius. So Ascanius, although you could argue in book 7, he shoots the deer, the sort of tame deer that ends up starting the war. He doesn't know that. That's the gods getting involved. The gods, remember, guide his hunting dogs towards this deer. Ascanius gets his first kill in war, and then Apollo says, that's enough. You step down now. And so Ascanius embodies this idea of doing just enough in war. You kill so that you become a man, but you don't get carried away from it, and you know when to step back. And that is why Ascanius essentially survives. He is that prosperous future realized. And so he is the true embodiment of pietas and controlled furor. Then finally we get these 3 women. And I've put up this quote from Sally Knight, and I will get into this more when I do a women presentation. All of these women are pious. Camilla is beloved by the gods. Amata, beloved by the gods. Dido, beloved by the gods. And yet they are all victims of furor that is incited by the gods. Less so Camilla, actually. She gives into furor because she sees this beautiful brooch, and her womanly desire for finery ends up being her downfall. But certainly with Amata and Dido, they are consumed with furor that is caused by the gods. And the furor is very much a female-dominated emotion. It's this idea that women are not in control of their emotions. And to the extent, especially with Amata and Dido, where they're so not in control of their emotions that they have to kill themselves. So they forego all rationality in that sense, and so end up killing themselves. I will get into this more in terms of women and furor, but hopefully that started to adapt to introduce you to some of these concepts of pietas, furor, Aeneas, etc., and how they all might fit into a 20 marker or perhaps a 30 marker if you're unlucky. Bye.